Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica DiRuzza. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I feel inspired to come on today and share with you my current insights on the Mercury retrograde in Aries that's happening right now for everybody. If you haven't gotten a chance to see my last live that I did earlier this week for the total solar eclipse on April 8th, I highly encourage you to watch that because a lot of things I'm going to be sharing today is going to be a continuation from that and an integration of what happened, particularly for you with that total solar eclipse, but really all together for this entire eclipse season in the Aries season, but on the Aries Libra nodal axis. So the last eclipse before April 8th was that lunar eclipse that happened on March 25th. When I come on here, my intention is to share connection points so that whatever it is that I'm sharing, I'm hoping that it lands and resonates in your life in some meaningful and hopefully also insightful and powerful way or empowered way for you to make those connection points for whatever is going on in your life. So that's why I'm on here. It's really about connection and making those, oh, I see. Oh, okay, that's what's going on, or that's why that's going on, or this is how I can be with what is going on. The current Mercury retrograde in Aries is happening between April 1st and April 25th. It's stationed retrograde at 27 degrees Aries and it goes back to 16 degrees Aries. I think that this particular Mercury retrograde is very fascinating because what it's doing is it's retrograding back over where the total solar eclipse point happened at 19 degrees Aries on April 8th. Mercury will retrograde back to 19 degrees of Aries on April 15th. And then it'll go back to the 16-degree point, which is only 1 degree off the North Node, which is currently at 15 degrees Aries. So it's really hitting strong the nodes. It's also hitting Chiron and where that total solar eclipse happened on April 8th. When it goes direct again, it's going to get back to the 19 degrees of where the total solar eclipse happened on May 4th. And then it'll move out of the window of degrees that it retrograded on May 14th. So we have a solid month here where I believe what is going to be happening in your life is going to be a continued deepening into what happened during this eclipse season. And what I want you to do, and what I think all of us need to do, and I do this myself, is instead of saying, like, well, what was this eclipse? Or did it do anything? The question actually is going, okay, I'm going to look at the events that took place between around March 25th to April 8th during that eclipse portal window time and I'm going to write it down. What were the most significant events that took place, or the most significant insights and epiphanies that you've had in your life? And then step back and try to be as objective as possible and look at the symbolic or archetypal themes that were going on for you. And what you'll notice is that there's a clustering of themes that took place during that eclipse season. This Mercury retrograde is about reviewing those events, revisioning those events, and getting deeper insight and clarity into what just happened for you. Then it's also about the integration into your life of those events, whatever they were for you. What you'll notice in those kind of clustering of archetypal themes that you're going to notice for your eclipse season is they're going to be directly related to wherever those eclipses were in your natal chart. And then this Mercury retrograde in Aries is going to be also going over that exact same part in your natal chart. And you're going to get an opportunity to deepen your psychosomatic understanding of those events. And what I mean by that is you're both going to have a greater mercurial intellectual understanding of it by getting a new perspective on how and why those events took place for you. But you're also going to get that experience of integration, which is that embodied part of soma, of the body, of actually living into and becoming whatever the revelations are or whatever the events are that happened for you. So I think in part, the purpose of this current Mercury retrograde is the opportunity to both review what happened during the eclipses and gain greater understanding for you and what the significance was, but also that piece of getting to integrate it. When we look at Mercury retrograde, we're looking at the archetype in the tarot of the hanged man. We're getting a new vision, we're getting a new perspective on something that either we already had a story around or we had a question mark around. And part of the reviewing and revisioning of Mercury retrograde is it forces us to slow down and take a different look at our life and take a different look at what's going on to get a different vantage point on it, because often we've missed something in the story. There's something that either we've already come to a conclusion around that either doesn't have all of the information in it, or it's a story that we're living into that doesn't really maybe have the full picture in it for whatever the messages of this eclipse season was for you, for your highest good. So what happens here is usually our kind of analytic minds, when Mercury is direct and moving very fast, most of us tend to be pretty quick to come to judgment or conclusion about what's going on in our life, and then we move on. Mercury retrograde forces all of us, as a species, to actually slow down and question what's going on in our life and say, I wonder what happens if actually I approach this situation and say, I don't know, or I want to know more. And so Mercury retrograde is a time period of curiosity instead of conclusion. And what usually ends up happening is during the retrogradation, we realize that we're missing information and that we actually need more information in order to make the decisions that we need to make to move forward based on, in this case, whatever just happened for you in this most recent eclipse season. I think that, and I've said this before, that I think Mercury retrograde actually kind of has a more feminine quality to it. I know that Mercury, the messenger of the gods, is, typically hermaphroditic. And um, it's, the only god that gets to freely go between the above world and the heaven and the below worlds. And so that freedom of fluidity to pass in between realms, in part is represented in this kind of hermaphroditic um, being or deity or god. But when Mercury slows down to go retrograde, there's something about it for me that has a particular feminine quality to it because of the gestational quality that the weeks of the Mercury retrogradation has for all of us. In its revelation, which is ultimately what it's about, it does so in a way that is less focused on being um, productive and forward moving and exterior in the world. And it has a lot more to do with taking the time to tend to our interiority, or the interiority of the psyche and the interiority of the cosmos, which is where symbolic language comes from. So it's through the interiority of psyche and the interiority of the cosmos seen in the planetary archetypes and the signs and houses that we get the quality of time instead of just of the quantity of time. Astrologers are timekeepers. But we don't just keep the astronomical time of the rhythms of the Saturnian clock. Today is April 11th, 2024. But we actually, as astrologers, are keeping the quality of time through understanding the cycles and seasons. So we're looking at the interiority of time versus the exteriority of time. And when Mercury goes retrograde, it has a particular quality of interiority, which is why it's a time period of self reflection. It's a time period of being more introspective. And in order to be self reflective and introspective, not only do we have to slow down like the planet does when it goes backwards, but we also have to be able to do a couple other things. One, we have to be willing to put down our defenses. We have to be willing to become more receptive. And we have to be willing to keep an open mind and to stay curious in that open mind of receptivity with our defenses down as we slow down, to ask questions that are needing to be asked to gain that hangman different new vantage point so that we can get the missing pieces of our story in order to make more informed decisions and actions around the integration process through understanding, in this case, of what just happened in this most recent eclipse season. So, first, we take stock of what happened and we go, hey, let's take some time, today with ourselves or a loved one and say, let's talk about what happened for us from March 25th to April 8th, around there, give or take. Let's write it down and then let's have a dialogue about it where we sit in mindful, intentional, sacred space, which Mercury retrograde loves. It's very ceremonial. And be curious about saying, I wonder, and this is a great way to start, I wonder why this happened, or I wonder what this means. Mercury retrograde time periods love open ended questions. And it's a I wonder. So instead of coming to something in a definitive, conclusive way, we want to come to it more in that feminized way, which is that open curiosity of I'm humble, I have humility before the mystery, I wonder. So the I wonder is the gateway into the mystery. And in through that passageway into the mystery, we get really beautiful messages. Because Mercury is the messenger of the gods. And when it goes backwards, it actually is trying to give us different kinds of messages and in different ways than usual. That's usually why Mercury retrograde time periods, our dreams can become more pronounced. Maybe we feel more called to meditation. Maybe we feel more called to going into some kind of either non ordinary or expanded states of consciousness. But it's also a really great time to be in any kind of therapeutic space where we are trying to see something that we haven't seen before and in a new frame. So, a good word for Mercury retrograde is reframe. It's a reframing. We pull this term from psychology of, hey, this is how I've been making meaning of this. Let's reframe it and think about it like this because this is actually a more empowering and loving place to come from than this old narrative. So, Mercury retrograde brings up old narratives in service to revision them, rethink them, and then get an opportunity to retell them from that hanged man new vantage point. That's the intelligence of the cyclical rhythm of Mercury retrograde happening 3 times a year for 3 weeks. It's the cosmos's way and Psyche's way, I believe, of getting us and encouraging us to move into a contemplative, inquisitive state of consciousness to be able to get different kinds of messages in different kinds of ways. Okay, so now I'm going to say, maybe a couple more far out things. So I also think that now this first one maybe isn't so far out, but I think that if someone is born with Mercury retrograde in their natal chart, they tend to do more favorably during Mercury retrograde times because there's an archetypal resonance between your natal chart and the collective seen in the world transits or the anima mundi. So there's the beautiful resonance between your soul this lifetime in a sacred union with your chart, and then this particular moment in the zeitgeist of the anima mundi, the soul of the world. I noticed that when people who are born with Mercury retrograde and Mercury retrograde happens, they come to life more, and kind of magical things happen where they're actually able to manifest their thoughts and vision with more poignant clarity than folks where Mercury is direct in their chart and going through a retrogradation. Now, here's my little more far out comment is I think Mercury retrograde has something in it that has qualities of being inherently neurodiverse. And I think that when Mercury goes retrograde in the sky, like it is right now, it has qualities of the experience of a little bit of what it's like to be a neurodiverse person, where your brain is neurologically built different than folks who are neurotypical. This means you process language differently, you process ideas differently, you tend to have different social differences. And so what happens is that during collective Mercury retrograde periods, there's sometimes this kind of fumbling that happens with our typical neurotypical ways, and it kind of can get a little clunky and awkward, and things can feel like they're breaking down. And I think part of the reason that is because if we take our understanding of what neurodiversity is is a more non-linear way of thinking and being in the world. So neurotypical people tend to be more linear in their thinking, right? Analytical. Where neurodiverse people like myself, we tend to be symbolic thinkers. We tend to think in pictures. That's why often we have incredible memories or even photographic memories. And we tend to not really see space time and operating in the same way as neurotypical people. So when Mercury's direct, it has more of that kind of logical, linear, analytical way of working, of the way that the mind is working, the way that we communicate, the way that we socialize, the way that we function in society. When it goes retrograde, it has more of this neurodiverse way of being, which is it's much more nonlinear, symbolic. And that's why during Mercury retrograde time periods, like the one we're in now, we tend to have memory retrieval. There are memories that come up from us from the past because space time doesn't quite operate in the same way. It has more of a timeless quality to it. And that way it's kind of more Neptunian than that kind of usual punctuated time of Saturn that it has when it's moving direct. So I want us to return to, I think, what this particular Mercury retrograde is in service of. And I really think that when we approach the planets in their alignments, whether it's in our natal chart, the world transits, or our personal transits, with seeing it from a vantage point of what's this in service of? And remembering that the universe is intelligent and there's a creative orchestration that's happening, we come from a different paradigm of making meaning. And so when we want to come from a different paradigm of making meaning, where we're participating in a co creation from a loving universe, then we come from a place of saying, I wonder what this is in service of. And so this Mercury retrograde, I think, in part is in service of giving us more time to be with and integrate and embody what just happened during this last eclipse season. And I think that that opportunity is going to be the most strong through April until Mercury goes direct on the 25th. But really, until it exits its shadow period, I think we have until about the middle of May. And so, what I'm going to suggest to you is that what happens for you in the interiority of your inner landscape and the way that your mind is processing and making sense of what just happened during this eclipse season, is that you're going to get greater insight around that through the rest of April, and you're going to get clarity, and it's going to make more meaning. It's going to make more sense. The more you sit with it, the more you stay open to it in the fashion in which I've already described, of curiosity and openness. And then what's going to happen is you're going to see this when Mercury moves direct on the 25th, this what is now an unfolding and furling. It's going to be the moving forward and putting the pieces together of coming from this new hanged man, new vision vantage point. So we want the retrogradation to be able to do its thing so we can get the new perspective and information that we need in order to fully move forward from a kind of more holistic or well-rounded place in what this portal of this eclipse season was meant for, and what truly happened for you during it. And then by the time we get to the middle of May, I think things are both going to make a lot more sense, but there's also going to be a lot more aha and then integration and embodiment of those themes. If there are any residuals of pain for you in what happened in this eclipse season, particularly the one on April 8th, because it was exactly conjunct Chiron at 19 degrees, I want to encourage you to get the support you need or take the time that you need to be with those pain points that happened for you. If we can sit with either the memories that came up or the events that happened and be with the pain, feel the pain, grieve the pain, what you're going to see is there's going to be a cleansing process and a purification process that is going to bring you both to a greater release of that within yourself and giving that relief that's needed, but also in hopes greater excitement and inspiration from a new grounded center through the purification process of the grief of Chiron, to not only greater healing and wholeness, which is what Chiron ultimately wants through the extraction of the pain and the wounds that are there, but it's also has the potential to bring us into greater mastery around the place in your chart that this Chiron is aspecting for you, and to tell a new story there with the Mercury retrograde going over it. It's to tell a new Chironic story. So if something inside has felt like it's been more in that place of victim or um, stuckness or powerlessness, there's a way that we are getting an opportunity right now with the Mercury retrograde going over the Chiron to revision and retell those chironic wounds that have perhaps in the past been experienced as limitations, obstacles, places in the psyche that have been uh, frozen, paralyzed, or thwarted in some way, and to um, unravel that, to untangle that. If anything's been tangled up or knotted up there, to unknot it and untangle it and gain greater mastery through the ownership. And this is really important with Chiron, the ownership of the story. So when we own our story, we're naturally given power. That's kind of what in part therapy is about, and I think also what astrology can be about at its best, is the ownership of our story gives us a certain power and a certain freedom in our life. And I think this Mercury retrograde is the unraveling and unknotting of those chironic entanglements of pain that have blinded us, which Chiron does because it's a blind spot, around that part in your chart that this particular eclipse on April 8th activated and opened up because of the exactitude with Chiron. So the Mercury retrograde is an opportunity to go in there and just do whatever pieces of unknotting and unraveling need to happen there, or detangling, to release it, to take ownership of that part of your life, your psyche that's seen in where it's hitting your chart, and then to retell that story from a more empowered place. And that's really the key of Chiron, that we're often looking for. Um, let's see here. Any last thoughts? If you're wanting to have greater understanding of the quality of Mercury retrograde, um, and to go into a kind of more contemplative place with it, my encouragement would be to read anything you can on the goddesses, um, and the female deities from a more matriarchal consciousness. So there are not only the gods and goddesses, but the world view that, or the cosmology that we understand those goddesses and those gods and their qualities, um, literally makes a world of difference. So, because I'm saying Mercury retrograde has more of this kind of feminine way of being experienced, if we look to the goddesses from a matriarchal consciousness understanding, we glean greater insight into the state or mode of consciousness that is most, I think, in resonance and alignment with Mercury retrograde and what its natural state is and what it's asking of us. I think it's inevitable for things to be fumbly and clunky when Mercury goes retrograde, but I also think that there is a way in which, when we can align ourselves more with the inherent quality of a transit, that we experience not only typically less suffering, but also, um, we get more out of the transit, because what we're doing is we are so deeply trusting the intelligence of the natural state of that transit. And we are coming from a worldview that says this is in service of something, this has an intelligence, there's a reason why it's here, this is not an accident, this is not a mistake, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And if I can be open and curious to it, then I'm granted access into its world, which means I'm granted access to receiving its medicine and its healing, loving qualities. Because what we're talking about here, and this returns to how I started this talk around connection, is we're talking about how do we have genuine, authentic connection with these archetypal energies, these gods and goddesses, these deities, source, however you think of it, at the different realms of being, and say, I wonder how I can best inhabit and participate with your um, inherent intelligent being. And then from there, receive a loving, kind, resonant transmission or download of knowing that in the wisdom path of philosophy, Sophia, the love of wisdom, it is by becoming energy that we best know it. And Mercury retrograde offers each of us an opportunity to see if we can practice becoming the energy in order to know it. So instead of looking at something from the outside and analyzing it, if we find a way to enter into its realm and inhabit it in a intra-hosting symbiotic union, then we become the energy, we become channels of the energy, we become vessels of the energy, and then there's a deep cellular knowing and healing and creativity and creative play that happens. And I think this is something that Mercury retrograde affords us. I think this is something that understanding and participating in astrology affords us. But I also think this is something that when we get more open and curious about the natural and necessary evolution of neurodiversity existing in the human brain and population, that we begin to realize the creative intelligence of the diversity of the different ways of knowing and being. And if we start to understand that there's a reason why it's like that, instead of trying to change it or make people who are different or neurodiverse like neurotypical people, then we actually come into a new paradigm where instead of trying to make things homogenous or monogamous, we actually begin to celebrate the plurality and difference in the universe as the inclusivity of diversity for the survival and enjoyment of our species. When we approach transits from that same place, instead of trying to make Mercury retrograde like Mercury direct, which I think is often what we're doing, I mean, that's what I'm seeing, then we're actually tragically missing out on the intelligence and medicine and reason why Mercury retrograde is intrinsically um, and structurally, poetically in the cycles and rhythms of our cosmos and solar system. So, the same way we don't want to make um, neurodiverse people like neurotypical people, we don't want to make Mercury retrograde like Mercury direct. So, that is, my approach and understanding when I'm working with astrology. And I know that that is a both cosmological take, a philosophical take, and a metaphysical take, but I think it's important to weave that in, because if we just sit here and say, oh, Mercury retrograde in Aries and it's doing this, we're actually objectifying um, the planets, and then they lose their interiority, and then they become dead symbols. And then it actually becomes a really inefficient way to live, because we're living on the outside of our lives instead of the inside of our lives. And it's only from the inside of us, each one of us, that we can know what is right for us and what is wrong for us. Thank you so much for being here with me. I hope you'll join me for my free astrology talk on the current Jupiter Uranus conjunction. It's happening this Sunday, April 14th. You can go to trustpsyche.com and register for free there. Bring a friend, all are welcome. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to talk for an hour and then open the floor for questions for anyone that has it. If you're looking for an astrology reading to understand how this Mercury retrograde applies to you or this previous eclipse season, you just want to deepen into that curiosity I've been talking about today, you can contact Travis DiRuzza at travis@trustpsyche.com. He's a phenomenal astrologer and a really compassionate and wise human being. And you can also check out our entire curriculum of astrology courses. Right now, we have 6 recorded courses available. It's over 200 hours of material from beginner to professional astrologer at trustpsyche.com through our astrology school. And I would love for you to follow me on Instagram at trust.psyche. As always, thank you so much for being here with me. Please leave a comment below. I always love to hear from you. I respond to everything. And yeah, may we all have the courage to see life from another vantage point.